Where are we at with Antonio Conte at the moment, Jack? A man who has had a very difficult year, personally.
Yeah, he's had a really tough year. I mean, he has lost three people very close to him, one of whom, Gianpiero Ventrone, who'd worked for him at Tottenham as he had in previous jobs, and now he's been pretty ill. Like the surgery he had is not minor. It's not a minor illness. It's not minor surgery. And clearly, it's kept him out of work for weeks. In terms of his contract, well, his contract expires at the end of the season. There have been talks earlier this season about a new contract. There is an option, but I think it's unlikely that the option would be. It's unclear in whose favour the option is, and I think it's unlikely that the option would be taken up if Conte could not agree a new deal. Tottenham would not want to keep Conte at the club against his will. So unless there is a big turnaround or both parties change their position somewhat, I expect Conte not to be the manager next season. I don't expect him to sign a new deal which would keep him there for next year.
Tim, would you agree?
There certainly haven't been any signs to contradict that, and Conte will talk about a project, but he also talks about it being a project he's not used to. And we've certainly seen with Juventus and Inter and Chelsea where there have been almost title-ready teams there for him to mould, whereas that's not the case here. This is a long-term project. Spurs' very good financial results came out a couple of weeks ago, and there's an interesting line in the statement that Levy put out about sort of being proud that the average age of signings is now 23. That's what we're looking at here, and that doesn't exactly fit with someone like Antonio Conte, who also, I think, even from his point of view, I mean, he's spoken a bit, obviously Jack mentioned there, how he's lost three people close to him this season, and he's been candid in press conferences and said, maybe he should spend more time at home with his family, and, things like what's happened to him this year has made him realise that. So, it doesn't feel necessarily too acrimonious between him and the chairman and the ownership, but it feels like more of just a natural parting of the ways this summer.
So who is the man then that has been standing in for him? Because he's done actually, when he stood in for him before, Inter Milan, when he stood in for him, he won both games there. You look at what's happened at Tottenham, and the Leicester game that Tim went to, actually, Stellini wasn't in charge for. Conte was back for that. But the win over Marseille in November, the win over Manchester City, the win over West Ham, the win over Chelsea, Jack, he has been in charge for.
Yeah, and I don't think it's completely coincidental. I think that Conte is very intense, clearly, and he's very demanding, and he's not necessarily a manager who is big on arm around the shoulder of a player if they're struggling, that sort of thing. And that means that, there's obviously Conte is an incredible coach, one of the best in the world, but when results are bad, when performances are bad, I think players' confidence drops, and Conte isn't especially good at recovering the confidence of players who are struggling. Whereas Stellini obviously comes at this from a different angle. He's spoken about this himself as an assistant manager. He's obviously closer to the players than Conte is. I think he's a bit better at giving, putting that arm around the shoulder. And I do think we have seen players who were not playing very well in the first half of the season are starting to play a bit better. Eric Dyer being case in point. I also think that Conte's absence has encouraged a bit more. It's kind of changed the decision-making process a bit at Tottenham. Conte is a very autocratic manager. He wants everything is his way. It's not up for discussion or debate. He just tells people how it's going to be. And again, these are methods which have had great success. So I'm not criticizing the methods inherently, but take him out of the picture. If you take the autocrat out of an autocracy, and it changes the dynamic. And what's replaced him, I think, is a more autonomous decision-making process. Players are taking responsibility, coaches are taking responsibility, and all the players have had to raise their level a bit to fill that gap. So I do think that, I'm not saying that Tottenham are worse with Conte, but I do think that the specific circumstances of Conte's absence this time has actually allowed the team to maybe loosen up a bit and grow a bit.
Yeah, it just seems calmer, doesn't it, Tim?
It does seem calmer. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think a really interesting case in point is Emerson Royale, who for my mind must be the most improved player in the Premier League this year. I mean, it's been remarkable how he's gone from one extreme to the other. I mean, the guy was, a walking calamity, to be honest. I find it incredible that he's been, Tottenham's first choice right wing back for the majority of this season. Like, astonishing. And he's completely flipped that on its head this year. And I do wonder if, when Emerson Royale plays no look passes that go behind for a goal kick or hits shots that literally leave the stadium at Bournemouth, I don't think Antonio Conte is the kind of guy that will sit him down and say, it's okay. Like, just keep going. Think things will get better. Put his arm around the shoulder. Whereas I think Emerson Royale is kind of player who needs that. He needs a bit of love, and Stellini's probably given him that. And it's probably no coincidence that his form has improved. I think.
Do you think as basic as that is, because when you talk to former players who are fullbacks in particular, right, and they always talk about how the half that they are on the opposite side to the dugout is a much better half for them than the half when they are next to the dugout, because they're getting so much of the manager's thoughts in their ear. Do you think it could be as simple as that?
It could be, yeah. I remember Tony Pulis saying that he used to switch Adama Traore's wings depending on which half he was playing because he needed to coach him through the whole game on the flip side of that. But I think certainly with Royale, they seem to have simplified his game. I mean, wing back's such a massive position for a Conte team, and he's had an overload of things to do in defence and attack. And I think they've told him, don't worry about crossing the ball as much and don't worry about balls in the final third as much. Just worry about defending. So I think they have modified his game slightly. And I think one other important point to make in all of this when we're talking about Tottenham's form is that they had this incredible schedule, as a lot of teams playing in Europe did, before the World Cup. So they had no free midweeks all through October and November. They played 13 games in 43 days, which is, and their form was all over the place, and injuries and selection were all over the place. So that's the 13 games before the World Cup, 43 days. 13 games since the World Cup have been over 63 days. So that's a full 3 weeks of extra training and rest. And with the squad that Tottenham have got, which isn't comparable to the teams that they're trying to compete with in terms of its size and strength, that's been really important, especially with so many players out of form, players like Richarlison, who still hasn't scored in the Premier League yet. They haven't got a wealth of attacking players to rotate who are in form. So having that settled 11 and more time on the training ground has definitely helped.
I know the majority of people listening to this will probably be Tottenham fans who will probably agree with you there, Tim. But do you really think their squad is much weaker than the teams that they are trying to compete with? When you look at, if you put City and Arsenal ahead of everybody else, and they're trying to compete for third and fourth with Manchester United and Newcastle at the moment. And if I was being really mischievous, I'd throw Fulham in there because I think they're 6th at the time of us recording this. But their squad's better than Newcastle's.
No, it is. I would say maybe I probably should have said clubs that they're trying to compete with rather than teams. There, I think, as in clubs like Chelsea,
where they view themselves.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, honestly, as recently as January, they didn't have a single attacker on their bench for one league game. Ryan Sessegnon was the most attacking player. I think it was for Villa at home. So they've tried to rectify that with a couple of January additions, but really, when you compare Chelsea's bench at the weekend, I mean, me and Jack were having a bit of a laugh trying to remember which of these players had played for Chelsea, and there's a couple of players we didn't remember were even there who suddenly appeared on the pitch. Spurs definitely haven't got that kind of luxury.
I don't think any other club can compare themselves to Chelsea at the moment. Just a final one on the Stellini-Conte relationship. Is your understanding that Conte is very much still involved and hands-on whilst recuperating? So actually what we're looking at is how the message is delivered as maybe being the difference, which is what you both alluded to.
Yeah, I think Stellini is basically on the phone all the time. I think maybe immediately after surgery, it was harder for him to be that involved, but now I think he speaks to Stellini constantly through the day, morning, even late into the night. He gets feedback on every training session. He basically picks the team. I think he would even speak to Conte at halftime to tell. Sorry, Stellini will even speak to Conte at half time, so that Conte can tell him exactly what instructions to give the players for the second half. So it's not as if Conte has, even though Conte isn't physically there, it's not as if Stellini has total autonomy to run things himself. You know, Conte is very much pulling the strings in the background.